She walked into the will reading to be mocked as the maid, and walked out owning the room and the entire empire. If you live for moments when truth flips the powerful, you're in the right place with Family Fallout Stories 365. Like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next turn. The Carr estate's great room looked like money had grown legs and learned manners. Glass spanning 2 stories, oak polished to a piano's shine, a chandelier that didn't twinkle so much as supervise, 40-something heirs and advisors clustered in small armies, phones held like badges. Conversations were soft, sharp, and always aware of who was watching. Nora Hale slipped in through the side door in a gray cardigan that had outlived 3 winters and 1 heartbreak. She kept to the wall, palms dry, shoulders square. The floor was marble, the color of cold milk. Her flats made no sound. Sloane Carr clocked her first, tilting a camera-ready face without lowering her voice. Is housekeeping open seating now? The smile didn't reach her eyes, which were the flat blue of a screen on pause. Lucian, all cologne and cufflinks, didn't bother disguising the sweep of his gaze. Kitchen's that way, sweetheart, he said, pointing with the tip of a champagne flute. Real doors, not museum pieces. Nora looked past them. Above the crown molding, tucked into the cornice, a pinprick of red pulsed steady as a heartbeat. There you are, she thought. The little LED that meant someone somewhere would remember what the room chose to forget. Her phone buzzed. She didn't check it. Breath in for 5, out for 5. She could name this kind of room in 4 notes: the perfume, the polished wood, the hunger humming under polite laughter. Benedict had once said, if the air tastes like a boardroom, bring your own weather. She had worn the cardigan. Excuse me. A man murmured at her elbow and the room shifted. Maynard Cho, the family attorney, set a slim leather case on the central table. He had the stillness of a surgeon and the patience of a clock. 1 sealed envelope, 1 thumb drive he tapped against his thumbnail, a nervous tick that sounded like a metronome. 10 o'clock, he announced, without raising his voice. The chandelier seemed to listen. Sloane drifted closer with 2 cousins in tow, phone lifted like a mirror. Do we need ID badges? She asked, bright as broken glass. Because some of us didn't bring credentials. Lucian chuckled, loose and practiced. A cardigan, he said. That count as clearance. Nora met his eyes. Clearance for what? To breathe this air, Sloane said. But hey, inclusion. She smiled wide enough to show every tooth. Somewhere behind her a shutter sound popped, someone else's phone, someone else's audience. The room always had one. Nora felt the old ache flicker. 15, thrift store dress, a girl at a winter formal asking if her mom had sewn it blindfolded. She had learned not to flinch. The lesson had cost her exactly 3 seconds of dignity and 2 weeks of not going out. Today, she didn't intend to spend a penny. Maynard drew a breath. Before we begin, a laugh cut him off, low and close. Lucian again, leaning in so his gold watch flashed like a tiny sun. Careful, counselor, we're allergic to suspense. Good, Maynard said, there will be none. The doors sighed shut, sealing the room. Nora shifted her cloth bag higher on her shoulder. The strap was weakening, she'd stitch it tonight, small need excess. A hand brushed her back, light, practiced, she didn't turn, the red LED burned steady. Someone lost this? Sloane sing-songed, voice sweet as a paper cut. Heads turned, Lucian's mouth curved. Nora glanced down. Tucked into her strap, a cocktail napkin rode like a pageant sash. 2 words in thick marker, letters fat and satisfied, charity case. She reached up slowly and touched the paper once, as if testing a loose tooth. The room waited, thrumming, hungry for the snap. Nora let the napkin sit where it was, lifted her chin an inch, and fixed her gaze on the little red light above the room, the witness no one had invited and everyone would meet. Proceed, she said, to no one in particular, and Maynard broke the seal. The hospice lounge smelled like lemon cleaner and old television, 2 channels always too loud for whoever was trying to die gracefully behind the doors. Nora signed out at the volunteer desk and found the coffee maker coughing into a styrofoam cup. She tapped the machine twice. It obeyed. That a union trick or a sacrament? A man asked from the doorway. He looked out of place in the thin light, dress shirt rolled to the forearms, tired in the eyes, rich in the posture of someone who never had to wait for elevators. He carried flowers that weren't quite right for a hospital, wild, stubborn, more roadside than florist. Depends who you ask, Nora said. I'm clergy for caffeine. He smiled. Benedict. Nora. She offered the second cup. You look like you've been awake 36 hours. My mentor's in 214, he said. He taught me to name the expensive lies first: pride, speed, certainty. He blew across the surface of the coffee. I'm failing the pop quiz. They sat in plastic chairs that gave up with little squeaks. The TV above them narrated a game show where people shouted prices at blenders. What do you do? Benedict asked. Read to people who can't sleep, Nora said, and tell anxious sons they're doing fine even when they aren't. He studied her for a beat. What do you need? She laughed softly. Boundaries, rules, he said as if counter-offering. I'm better with rules. Okay, rule 1. Never miss a Friday earnings call, he said. Except this one, boundary. No photos, she said. No pretending. If you're buying coffee, you're also listening. He nodded like he'd been waiting to be told what to do by someone who didn't want anything from him. They talked until the coffee cooled. At the end, he stood with the flowers and didn't go yet. Can I see you again? He asked, and it wasn't slick. It was almost shy when the machines are quieter. Bring worse coffee, she said, so I know you're not trying to impress me. They made a habit out of smallness. Saturday morning sidewalks. Library book sales. Her thrift cardigan that he liked to tug at the sleeve when they crossed streets, a private rope. He never told her what he was worth, she never asked. When he pushed, she pushed back. I can't be a secret, she told him on a bench in early spring. You won't be, he said, you'll be protected. He meant it like a promise. She heard the hinge in it. The courthouse clerk wore pink nails and a bored expression. 2 witnesses, she asked. A nurse on lunch, Sarah Ellis, lifted a hand. A man with a stack of returns, Michael Reed, librarian, set his papers down and smiled like he'd always wanted to be useful. No ring ceremony, just words. Nora said yes, without makeup and with every part of her awake. Benedict's hands shook when he signed as if he finally respected the document more than himself. After, they bought tacos from a truck that only took cash and laughed when Salser ran down his cuff. Why like this? He asked later, in the small apartment that smelled like basil and laundry. Why me? Because you listen when I say stop, she said, and you don't treat my quiet like a puzzle to solve. It's the pulse at her wrist. Rule, he murmured. If I fail you, you tell me before the world does. Boundary, she said. If the world chases us, we don't run toward it. Nora kept her job. He kept his schedule. They kept a little joint account he insisted on: groceries, gas, paperbacks, numbers small enough to forget. The rest of his life stayed armored, the rest of her stayed ordinary. It worked until it didn't. On a rain-thick afternoon a year later, he stood by the window, tie in his pocket, phone on the table face down like it might bite. I have to step back, he said. For how long? As long as it takes. To do what? He looked at her the way people look at the sky before a storm, like asking it not to be itself. If I disappear, Benedict said quietly, assume I'm measuring hearts. Sloane angled her phone like a scalpel. Smile, she said to no one, and the camera caught Nora's profile, the cardigan sleeve, the cloth strap, the napkin writing it like a brand. Sloane's thumbs moved with athlete speed. Caption, found the charity case crashing the car will. Sweetheart, thrift won't buy you a dynasty. Hashtags like teeth, post. The room noticed the way rooms do now by the faint, collective inhale of 100 tiny screens refreshing at once. A cousin whispered, it's already at 800 likes. Another, look at the comments. Savage, laugh emojis bubbled, then words. Who let the help in? Made core but make it delusional. Talk about generational wealth gap lol. Nora didn't look. 5 in, 5 out. A trick from the hospice nights when fear rattled rib cages like keys. She focused on Maynard's neat hands sliding paperwork into a grid, on the chandelier's patient geometry. She let the laughter skim over her like wind over a pond, making ripples and no change. 2,000. Sloane announced, pleased. Numbers don't lie. They do when you pay them, said a voice behind her, dry as dust. Damon Pike, CFO, suit the color of smoke, smile laid on like primer. He watched Nora without moving his head. But virality has its charms. Kira Moss sat half in shadow on a window ledge, legs crossed in a way that looked accidental and wasn't. She hadn't been introduced. She rarely was. Sloane squinted at her. Who even? Decor. Damon said, not looking at Kira at all. Try not to chip it. Lucian drifted to the edge of the cluster, phone low, eyes higher. He had the manic stillness of a gambler staying perfectly still so luck won't notice him. His screen lit his jaw, the text stark. Gray, 48 hours, interest doubles. Don't make me get poetic. He swallowed, then typed, working on it. 3 dots. Gray never used emojis. Tick, tock. Lucian glanced at the mantel where a silver clock clicked like a polite threat. He scanned the room for anything that could turn into cash. Antique clock, too traceable. A ring off Sloane's hand, suicidal. He settled on inventorying the gallery of small things that wealthy people forget are worth strangers' rent. Paperweights, limited prints, a little bronze horse you could slip into a pocket if you weren't shaking. Relax, Sloane murmured, misreading the tremor as vanity. You look amazing. Debt ages you faster than dairy. Mind your endorsements, Damon said mildly. Brands don't love famine jokes. Sloane rolled her eyes. Brands love me watching me. She refreshed. 3,000. I should start a playlist of humbling moments. Nora's heartbeat climbed and then settled. She remembered Benedict on the library floor of her apartment, tracing a rip in the cardigan with a fingertip. This is what I like best about you, he'd said. What holes? That you keep what still works. She slid her thumb along the strap seam, felt the weakness there, the promise to mend it later. A life could be built out of promises kept to small things. Kira's gaze flicked from Nora to Damon to Lucian, storing everything like a magpie with a ledger. She leaned toward Damon just enough for him to catch the whisper. "You sure you want this many cameras? Pride is a lousy alibi." He didn't turn. "I sleep fine." "I don't," she said, and smiled in a way that wasn't friendly. At the edge of the carpet, Marta, the housekeeper, paused with a tray of empty flutes. Her eyes met Nora's for the length of a breath. A question, an apology, and "I see you." Nora nodded once. The red LED in the cornice pulsed, patient as tide. "Update," Sloane sang. "We're trending, #thrift store thriller." "Cruelty scales faster than kindness," Maynard said, not looking up. "But kindness lasts longer." Sloane blinked, unsure if she'd been complimented or insulted. "What?" "Nothing," he said. "Please silence your devices." No one did. A ringtone barked. Someone hissed a laugh. The great room had the electric itch of a theater before the curtain, phones smoldering like contraband cigarettes. Lucian stepped backward, shoulder brushing Nora's. He didn't apologize. "Don't get comfortable," he muttered, and the way he said it wasn't about chairs. "I'm fine standing," Nora said. He smirked. "Not for long." Damon's watch ticked a fractional second fast, his only tell. Kira stretched and yawned feline, then slid off the sill with a cat's soundless feet. "Showtime," she said to no one. Maynard cleared his throat. The room arranged itself around him, some out of respect, some because gravity prefers a center. He lifted the slim leather case he'd brought and placed it on the table with the care of a ritual. Then, from his briefcase, he drew out a small lacquered box, black as a piano and smooth enough to catch the chandelier's light in a white, trembling line. He set it beside the envelope and rested his palm on the lid, as if feeling for a pulse. Inside, something metal touched wood with a soft, intimate click. Maynard lifted the sealed envelope like it had a temperature. He didn't clear his throat this time. He just let the room quiet itself, which it did. Phones lowered a fraction, laughter evaporating as if someone had opened a window in winter. "Last will and testament of Benedict Carr," he said, voice even as a plumb line. "Witnessed and recorded 3 years ago, verified." A cousin snorted. Sloane flicked her eyes to her screen, then back. Lucian scratched his jaw, staring at the seal like he might bite it. Damon folded his hands, thumbs pressed together in a church steeple, patient and bored. Maynard broke the wax. It made a soft rip that felt louder than it should have, like tearing gauze in a quiet room. He unfolded heavy paper, the kind that makes you behave. "I, Benedict William Carr," he read, "being of sound mind and very aware that people become interesting around money, declare the following." Ripple moved through the crowd, the subtle shift of people deciding whether to be amused. Maynard didn't look up. "To my relatives, colleagues, and assorted orbiters, I leave this truth. Wealth reveals character, not worth." Someone laughed but stopped halfway. The chandelier hummed like it was wired to a pulse. "I have established trusts for existing obligations and charitable pledges already filed with council. With the remainder, my controlling shares, properties, patents, accounts, and intellectual rights, I bequeath everything to my spouse, Nora Hale Carr." The room went bright and blind at once, like stepping from shade into noon. Sloane's mouth unhinged. "His what?" "Spouse," a gray tant repeated, as if the word had lost meaning. "As in wife," Lucian barked. "Cute, who wrote this Netflix?" Damon's eyebrow traveled the distance of a dime. Kira's lips placed a smirk where it would do the most damage. Maynard went on, unbothered. "This bequest is accompanied by a moral condition already recorded with the court. Those documented to have degraded or defamed my spouse in the context of this proceeding forfeit any ancillary distribution from prior instruments." "What does that even?" Sloane began. "It means receipts," Maynard said. He turned a page. "And we have them." "That woman is a fraud," a man near the back said. Gerald Hayes, investor, linen suit like a flag of surrender. He pointed at Nora as if deputized. "Logan Benedict never married her. Look at her. She's careful," Maynard said, polite as a door closing. Sloane found her voice and a sneer to put in it. "Where's proof?" "A Facebook status, a ring she forgot to pawn." "She probably printed a fake license at a Kinko's," another cousin muttered. "People catfish with less." Nora felt the heat but didn't move into it. She watched Maynard's hands instead, capable, square, the skin along the knuckles gone pale with pressure. Somewhere above the molding, the red LED winked its disinterest in anyone's opinion. "You'll produce witnesses?" Damon asked, mild. "Or are we meant to accept a narrative?" "You're meant to accept documents," Maynard said. "Then decide what you are without them." Lucian laughed, a bright, ugly sound. "I decide she leaves." Sloane tossed her hair so it caught the light, a trained reflex. "You can't just drop wife like a promo code and expect." "Expect what?" Nora said, finally. Her voice was low, careful, a tool, not a flare. "Manners." The hush that followed had weight. Even the clock seemed to consider its next tick. Gerald recovered first, jabbing the air. "You are not Mrs. Carr. If you were, none of us would." "No," Nora suggested. "That was the idea." It landed. She watched it land in their faces. The insult of a secret they hadn't been given, the humiliation of an audience that wasn't theirs. People who had never been surprised in a way that wasn't catered. "Enough," Sloane snapped like she was shooing a cat. "Maynard, stop indulging theater. Produce a certificate or stop wasting our." Maynard set the paper down and reached for the small lacquered box he'd introduced earlier. He touched the lid as if greeting an old friend, then slid it open. Inside, foam cradled a single metal key and a slim gray thumb drive the size of an accusation. He lifted the drive between forefinger and thumb. "You asked for proof." Sloane scoffed. "What a PowerPoint." "Evidence," he said. He turned the drive, thumbnail resting against its edge. The chandelier gathered itself. The phones in the room, curious as birds, angled to watch. The red LED in the cornice kept blinking, steady as breath. Maynard looked at Nora just once, a question and an answer in the same glance, then brought the drive up, balanced it against his nail, and let it tap. A tiny, decisive click cut the air. Maynard slid the thumb drive into the waiting port. The wall screen woke like an eye. Grainy first, then crisp. Courthouse steps the color of old limestone, a flag tugged by wind, a date and time burned in the corner like a small, stubborn truth. 04/12, 7 years back, 1:17 p.m. Benedict in a plain suit, nervous in the hands, laughter hiding in the corners of his mouth. Nora in a simple white dress, hair pinned like she'd done it herself because she had. The camera angle was practical, unbeautiful, and therefore credible. The clerk appeared, pink nails, then two witnesses slid into frame, Sarah Ellis, a nurse with a salad in a Tupperware, and Michael Reed, the librarian with ink on his fingers. Papers traded palms. Pens scratched. A kiss quick enough to be private even on camera. Sloane's whisper cut sideways. Could be deep-faked. Maynard didn't blink. A second window opened, a forensic report headed by a firm with more Latin than vowels. Bullet points marched. Source verified. Chain of custody intact. Signatures match historical exemplars. No signs of manipulation within confidence intervals. "Confidence," Damon murmured, tasting the word, "chewy." The video ended and froze on Nora's smile, not bright, just sure. Maynard clicked again. A spread of images, marriage license with county seal. 2 letters in Benedict's hand, one smudged where his wrist must have dragged. The handwriting slanted like a man leaning into wind. The analyst's overlay traced pressure points and hesitations. Checkmarks lined up like soldiers. Gerald smacked the air. "Anyone can get paper and pretend." "Pretend cheaper," Maynard said, dry. He advanced to bank records. A joint account with Nora's name hyphenated and small numbers that lived like houseplints, $42, $19, $68, 03 payday deposits to a hospice foundation. Memo lines, gas plus basil paperbacks, her shoes finally, Sloane snorted. An empire of groceries. "That's the point," Maynard said. "No siphons, no upgrades, nothing you could brag about at dinner." Kira's voice floated from the window. "The quiet money is the only money that feels human." Damon shot her a look. She smiled without apology. Nora kept her gaze on the screen. The letters were the hardest thing to look at, his blocky lines cutting through her day across time. "You smelled like rain and coffee in the same 10 minutes, and I thought, well, that's it then." She heard his laugh in her head, the one that slid under her ribs and made something unclench. "Chance," Lucian said too loudly, voice pitching toward anyone who would catch it. "Chance the court clerk's an actress. Chance the nurse and the book guy are paid. Sarah Ellis still works at county," Maynard said. "Michael Reed just retired after 33 years. They will both testify if asked. They liked the tacos that day." He let it sit. The room didn't move. Sloane tried another angle, brighter, meaner. "If this is real, why hide it?" "Because you," Nora said. Sloane blinked. "Excuse me. You've turned people into content so long you don't recognize a life kept offstage," Nora said. "He wasn't ashamed of me. He was protecting me from rooms like this." Lucian laughed short. "He wouldn't marry a nobody." "He didn't," Nora said. It landed flat and devastating. Marta, at the doorway with a tray, closed her eyes for a second and then opened them wider, as if willing someone else to see. Maynard capped the performance with logistics. Marriage certificate on file. Prenup waived by mutual letter 6 months later. There's also a scanned note to Nora regarding beneficiaries, already filed. He let the last slide fill the screen, Benedict's signature beside hers, 2 names weighted equally by black ink and county law. Silence drew the outline of every person in the room. The clock clicked polite as ever. Somewhere a phone vibrated against wood like an insect caught in a jar. Lucian flinched. He palmed his screen, shielding it with his body, but the light still flashed against his jaw. Gray, where's my money? Another buzz. Gray, 40 hours. Don't make me visit your maid. His knuckles whitened around the glass. He looked up too fast and knocked his champagne. It tilted, caught. Saved by reflex and luck. Sloane smirked, ready to turn anything into a punchline. Maynard, already moving on, reached to eject the drive. If there are no more questions. Just one, Damon said, smile soft as dust. What's in the lacquered box besides theater? Maynard's fingers rested on the lid like a priest on a Bible. The second key, he said, for what opens when the first truth fails. Lucian slipped out on a laugh that didn't belong to him. He took the service corridor, cool as a hotel vein, down 2 flights where the camera domes were older and the light forgot people's names. The stairwell smelled like steel and lemon. He hit call before he could think better. 40 hours, Gray said by way of hello. The voice was all gravel and calendar. Tick. I'm moving pieces, Lucian said. Liquidity takes. Names make things faster, Gray said. Marta Alvarez, that who dust your daddy's pictures. Lucian's stomach turned. Don't say her name. You owe me names, not money. Gray let the quiet widen. I'm poetry when I'm ignored, rhymes with missing. I'll have it. Lucian whispered, by tomorrow. You had it yesterday. A soft breath may be a match. 40 becomes 36. If I have to drive, I don't drive alone. Leave the staff out of it. Staff are doors, Gray said, amused. Everything opens if you lean hard enough. The call clicked dead. Lucian stared at the no-service brick like it had insulted him personally. His hands shook. He jammed them in his pockets and climbed back up. Not to the great room, but to the side hall with the family portraits and the display cases that thought glass made them safe. He inventory counted with a pawnbroker's eye. The bronze horse, too art world to move fast. The antique compass, too sentimental, Benedict remembered oceans. A cigar cutter with diamonds, perfect. He popped the case with a butter knife tucked under the tray of canapes, fingers slick. Whoa, Sloane said softly, phone already up. Delight bouncing in her throat. Is today Heir shoplifting day? He didn't look at her. You don't post that. I post what I breathe, she said. Also, that diamond thing is tacky, try the Cartier clock. My followers love a vintage panic. He closed the cutter into his palm. Delete it. She framed him tighter. Say please. Theo stepped between them, diffusing the frame with his shoulder. Don't, he told Lucian. No heat, just wait. Lucian laughed. A sound like he was swallowing coins. You're not even blood. Neither is rot, Theo said. It still spreads. Sloane's eyebrows lifted. Okay, poetry club. Theo kept his eyes on Lucian, put it back. Lucian's mouth worked. You need to stop making your crisis everyone else's problem. Theo softened half a degree. Talk to me, we can. We, Lucian said, tasting the plural like a dare. His phone trembled in his pocket. You think Benedict's ghost is going to Venmo me? Benedict's alive, Theo said. You saw him walk in. Which means he can watch me drown, Lucian snapped. He shoved past, shouldering air that wasn't in his way, and cut through the gallery toward the servants' hall. Sloane followed at a glide, narrating under her breath for footage she'd edit later. Heir Meltdown, Episode 1. She panned to Marta, who was polishing silver with the reverence of a church woman. Smile, sweetheart, you're in legacy television. Marta didn't smile. She looked at Lucian the way a field looks at weather, resigned, unmoved. Can I help you find something, sir? Keys, he said, to the basement safe. Those aren't for today, Marta said, and they're not for me. Lucian stepped closer. Who has them? Maynard, she said, and her voice didn't shake. And Mr. Carr. He pivoted, frustration looking for a softer target. Sloane's lens was a taunt. Post that, he said, daring her. See what it buys you when the cut-off letters go around. Attention is a currency, Sloane said. It never gets devalued. In a blackout it does, Theo said. Lucian's phone buzzed again, one word, drive. He flinched hard enough to slosh Sloane's champagne. She hissed and shook her wrist, pearls clacking. Watch it, she said. These were a gift. Everything here is a gift you didn't earn, he said, then seemed surprised to hear himself tell a truth out loud. He bolted for the back stair. Sloane, high on capture, kept her phone up. Theo moved with him, not blocking this time but shadowing, herding him away from display cases and toward doors that led out, away, anywhere but theft. On the landing, Lucian took the call without looking. He angled his face to the wall, voice a hiss. Yes. Basement in 20, Gray said, or I pick my own door. What does that mean? You got maids, gardeners, cousins who think they're better, doors, all of them. You don't touch them, Lucian said. They're not collateral. Everything is, Gray said pleasantly, and plan for the rich. Everyone in your house is furniture or leverage. I'm not picky. A shoe scuffed tile. Lucian jerked. He looked up. Nora stood at the top of the stairs, one hand on the banister, cardigan sleeve pushed to the elbow. She'd come looking for cold water and quiet and found neither. Her eyes were clear as the glass in Maynard's display cases. Lucian swallowed, pocketed his phone, tried for a smile that had never fit. Private call. Nora's voice was even. You called the kind of man who turns people into warnings. Lucian's face hardened. You don't know my math. You don't know your witnesses, she said, and tilted her chin. The ceiling camera's red light blinked, patient as ever. He followed her gaze and laughed without humor. You think a little dot saves anyone? No, Nora said. I think it makes choices stick. He stepped past her, knocking her shoulder on purpose the way boys do when the field says they're losing. As he reached the corner, the phone buzzed again. He didn't answer. It didn't matter. The stairwell carried sound like a rumor. Gray's last text bloomed across the screen as the door swung. 20 minutes. If the safe stays shut, the staff don't. Damon Pike's temporary office had the luxury of a crime that didn't believe it was one. Hand-rubbed desk, sound-damp carpet, a wall of glass that looked onto trees as if the trees worked for him. The door clicked and sealed like a vault. On the screen, columns and columns, numbers lined up like soldiers waiting to obey. Top tab read Orion AP Ledger. The active vendor, Trident Vale LLC. Kira Moss lay sideways on the leather chaise, shoes off, ankles crossed, phone face down on her belly like a sleeping cat. She watched him not his hands but the spaces between them. You're humming, she said. You only hum when you think you're art. Damon didn't look up. Art is for people who can afford to fail. Cute, she yawned. What's Trident Vale today? Management consulting. Data hygiene, thought leadership. The last words had a flavor. Aggregation, he said. We bundle small vendor payments under a master services agreement. Lowers friction, improves optics. Optics, she repeated like a sommelier swishing vinegar. Benedict buy that. Benedict bought outcomes. Damon clicked a cell, a cascade of formulae flashed, then hid. He never checked me. Kira turned her head. Nora will. He smiled into the glass. She shops by feel. Humanity Basil paperbacks. She won't chase decimals. She'll ask why a Delaware ghost company gets $480K a quarter to calibrate strategy when strategy is you. Kira rolled to her stomach, chin in her palm. And why cash equivalents just spiked on a Friday at 4:57 p.m. He opened another tab, Trident Vale disbursements. A list of wires marched rightward, came in Zug. A boutique bank that pretended it was a hedge of trees. Memo lines purred. Retainer true up, Q2 advisory, non-compete good faith. He hovered over a line item. The tooltip bloomed, card program issued /activated 12. Corporate cards for contractors, he said. We're agile. You're porous, she said, and sloppy. Damon finally faced her, amused. You're welcome to leave, Kira. I did leave, she said, stretching like a cat considering claws. A dozen times, you keep texting me problems like they're foreplay. He leaned his hip on the desk. You like proximity to danger. I like leverage. She watched his eyes. There's a difference. He tapped the monitor with one elegant knuckle. There's also scale. Trident Vale is 4 steps from anything with my name on it, that's the point. If anyone tugs, they get bored before they get fed. Unless what they tug is a person, Kira said. Boredom doesn't work on grief. You think Nora is grief? Damon's smile thinned. She's theater in knitwear. She's a metronome, Kira said softly. She keeps time when everyone else speeds up to hide. He let the comment die. Back on the screen, the dashboard refreshed. Vendor spend 12 months, a pleasing mountain that hit a cliff. Approvals, DP only, CEO review, waived per policy revision. He had signed that revision himself, a neat loop in a sea of compliance. Here, he said, and pulled up a PDF of invoices that all smelled like the same cologne. Logos barely different, fonts perfectly the same. Best practice. Best fiction, Kira said. You stamped your own homework. Someone has to be the adult. The adult goes to prison, she said, almost kind. He laughed. It had no aftertaste. Benedict never checked me, he said again, and this time it sounded like a lullaby he'd written for himself. Kira slid off the chaise, barefoot on the good carpet. She drifted toward the window, then past it, then to his shoulder, close enough to see the pixels on the graph. The phone in her palm woke to her thumbprint, no sound, no flash. He felt her there and mistook it for admiration. You should find another man who understands systems, he said. Artists bore you in 6 weeks. Systems are men, she said. You just name them things like Orion. He smirked. You can be sentimental and correct. Her camera opened. The lens kissed the glass in a blink. The Orion dashboard framed neatly. Trident Vale at top left. Approver, D. Pike and Fine, incriminating gray at bottom right. She angled for glare, waited for the graph's refresh, caught the card program tell ticking from 12 to 13. You're awfully close, Damon murmured, not looking. We making a memory. Insurance, she said. For what? For whoever's left. She let the word float. He waved her off, already bending the screen to another page, already bored with his own danger. Kira let the photo fall into Moss/personal/cloud, labeled it Trident Veil Summary, PNG, and hit send. The little paper airplane on her screen flew, small and sure, toward a folder that had only one subscriber, her. The front gates recognized her car the way old neighborhoods recognize trouble, slowly, suspiciously, then all at once. Jules Parker leaned out her window and told the guard, "Nora Hale is expecting me." The guard checked a list that tried not to judge. The iron scrolled open like a sigh. She parked beneath a beach that had outlived 3 owners and most of their promises. City dust still clung to her bumper. She stared at the estate's stone ribs, found her face in the windshield, sleep-starved, lipstick borrowed from confidence. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder. Eden Klein Daily Sphere, we're good for 80K wire by Friday. Needs audio, names today. Jules swiped it away like a fly. She tucked a small velvet box into the pocket of her coat. Not jewelry. A voice pin the color of a button, the kind PR teams pretended didn't exist. She hated how light it felt. Nora met her at the side entrance, cardigan sleeves shoved up, hair looped into a knot she hadn't planned. They hugged with that relief that says you were real when things weren't. "You look thin," Nora said. "You look like a moral panic in knitwear," Jules said, trying for light. It landed crooked. They walked the stone path toward the library where Maynard waited, the great room's noise muffled like weather on the other side of glass. Jules hooked an arm through Nora's the way she had at 22 when rent was a math problem only friendship solved. "Remember when the landlord taped the eviction notice crooked?" Jules said. "You pulled it off and taped it straight so we could photograph it for evidence." "You said straight lines make liars nervous," Nora smiled. Jules bit the inside of her cheek. She could taste metal. On the phone that morning, Eden had sounded like a friend who knew better. "Not the villain here, Jules. Think about your mom's meds. Think about the months you've juggled 3 shifts and a broken tooth. This is journalism, sunlight." The library was a softness of lamps and lawyer wood. Maynard stood by a table with a folder he didn't enjoy. "MS Parker," he said, small bow. "Thank you for coming in." "I'm a feral cat," Jules said. "I go where the food is." "We're serving truth," Maynard said. "It's bland, but it keeps people alive." Nora touched the back of a chair and looked at Jules with the kind of steady that costs a person. "I wanted you here," she said. "Not because I need a witness, because I don't want to do this without someone who knows my laugh." "I know all the versions," Jules said. "The one with the snort is the best, you ration that." Nora's eyes shined and cleared. Maynard took the cue. "We'll need to walk through what's about to happen, who will be contacted, what the filings mean. There will be noise, we can insulate a little." "Noise," Jules repeated, rolling the word in her mouth like a pill. They sat. The velvet box in Jules's pocket pressed against her thigh, a mean little heartbeat. She kept her hands above the table so she wouldn't touch it. The library smelled like vanilla in old paper and the kind of polish people mistake for goodness. "People who laughed at you this morning," Nora began, "are running out of jokes," Maynard finished. "We're helping them run faster." Jules laughed once. "You two could take this on the road." Nora reached across and covered Jules's wrist with a warm, ordinary palm. "You okay?" "Fine," Jules lied. She felt a shift in the house like a stagehand pulling a rope. Somewhere a door sighed. Somewhere Sloane's voice pitched up for an audience that would forget her by dinner. Jules thought of the pharmacy line last week, how the clerk had said, insufficient, like accusing a person of a character flaw. "Maynard," Nora said, turning to business. "Walk me through the moral condition again, every word." He did, cleanly. As he spoke, Jules studied Nora's face like a familiar street map you suddenly notice is full of one-way signs. The friend who had once pawned a necklace to cover Jules's last semester fees, quietly, not for points, sat in a billionaire's library with a backbone you could set watches to. The velvet box heated in Jules's pocket until it felt like an alarm. She shifted, crossed her legs. When Nora stood to pour water, Jules's fingers moved without permission. She slid the voice pin from the velvet and palmed it beneath the table's lip. Then, when Maynard leaned toward a diagram, pressed it smoothly into the seam of a bookend carved like a lion. Her breath snagged. No one looked. The phone buzzed again. "Eden, we can blur the friend if she's collateral. You'll be anonymous. This exposes a hidden marriage affecting shareholders. Public interest. Upload now." "I'll push Sloane's clip for cover. 2 storms at once, she'll take the heat." Jules swallowed. "Bathroom?" she asked, too casual. "Left," Maynard said without glancing up. In the hallway, the portraits watched like they had opinions. Jules leaned against cool stone and closed her eyes for 3 seconds. Memory spiked. Her mother in an ER bay, the nurse saying we can't release the inhaler until the copay clears. Jules had counted crumpled bills and said, "Can we pay half and breathe half?" Her phone pulsed in her palm, urgent as a siren. Back in the library doorway, she watched Nora tuck hair behind her ear, watched Maynard align the corners of a document just so. The red LED in the ceiling blinked, patient as a metronome. Jules thought, they will crush her anyway, at least I can pay the rent. She thought, she'll forgive me, she forgives everyone. She thought, finally, the sentence that ruins people, I don't have a choice. She opened the Daily Sphere upload window, the file picker bloomed, the voice pin-paired, cheerful and traitorous. On the screen, choose files. Her thumb hovered. Another text arrived and sat like a command at the top of everything. Eden, upload now. Maynard didn't ask for quiet, he took it. He touched a brass switch and the great room exhaled into dusk, chandelier dimmed, phones casting small, guilty moons on faces. The wall screen woke again, not with romance this time, but with angles. Foyer, cornice, door cam. The small black bead above the mantel that guests assumed was a smoke detector because wealth loves polite lies. The will includes a moral condition, Maynard said. Filed with the court, notarized, time-stamped. It names one behavior with consequences, documented degradation of Mrs. Nora Hale Carr in the context of these proceedings results in immediate forfeiture of any ancillary distribution. Sloane laughed bright for the mic. Cute clause, who's your documentarian Pixar? House Systems, Maynard said. And you? A grid slid into place, 9 views. In the top left, Nora entering, cardigan gray against marble. Top center, Sloane's camera up, lips curling as she framed the shot. Top right, Lucian pointing down a hall like a mall cop. Middle left, a cousin's hand, velvet jacket, cocktail napkin, tucking the charity case sash into Nora's strap. Middle center, the moment phones lifted like a flock. Middle right, Nora's face not breaking. Bottom left, Marta pausing with a tray, setting a glass of water where Nora might reach it without being seen. Audio bloomed, cleaner than anyone liked. The cornice mic had been placed by a man who had once loved physics. Kitchen's that way, sweetheart. Is housekeeping open seating now? Laughter layered, the kind that tries to be a breeze and lands as a slap. Sloane's post crawled along the lower third, captured in real time, found the charity case crashing the car will. Sweetheart, thrift won't buy you a dynasty. Hashtags bit. Beside it, a parallel feed, comments, climbing, mean little fish. Sloane's mouth opened. This is stalking. This is property you posed on, Maynard said. And consent you clicked past when you RSVP'd. Page 3, paragraph 2. The video cut to Marta again. The camera caught it like a kindness spilled. Her hand, quick and sure, plucked the napkin from Nora's strap when the room turned to watch Maynard break the seal. Marta palmed the insult and slid it into her apron, face clean of theater. The room made a sound people make when they remember what decency looks like. Theo, at the edge, looked at Marta like a person seeing a lighthouse in weather. Lucian shifted. His jaw clicked. He watched the velvet arm slipping the napkin in slow motion and didn't recognize his own sleeve until the watch flashed, a gift he'd bragged about last Christmas. He swore under his breath. Sloane's camera had caught that angle too, her giggle rode over it like confetti. Damon cleared his throat into a fist. What is the scope of documented? We're talking intent, not ambience. Words spoken, gestures made, posts published, Maynard said. Intent is the luxury of people who never read terms. Sloane went for righteous. So one joke and we're paupers. Not one, Maynard said. A montage answered for him. Sloane's caption, Lucian's point and sneer, the cousin's napkin, a chorus of who let the help in, a pearl-hard voice calling Nora embarrassing. Each insult landed with a timestamp and a source tag. The grid paused on Nora's face, posed as a church before dawn. Anything else you'd like to enter into the record voluntarily? Maynard asked, before the court receives these files. Silence moved through the room like weather that meant it. Then the screen shifted, not live, not courts, a recording. The light was different, clean, and patient. Benedict sat inches from the lens, shoulders easy, eyes that had made and unmade rooms. He looked like a man who had rehearsed telling the truth. If you mocked her, Benedict said, voice unhurried, you forfeit me. He let the words rest in the room the way a final bell rests in bone. You forfeit what you think I owe you, and you prove why you were never going to be entrusted with it in the first place. He glanced off camera, as if to where Nora would be. There are receipts, there are always receipts. The wall didn't blink, it became a face. Not pre-recorded this time. The light had the cold honesty of a clinic. The time stamp sat in the corner like a notary. 10:32 a.m. Benedict Carr filled the frame from the ribs up. Clean shirt, no tie. The kind of tired people earn by making choices that cost. No music, just the low hum of a vent and his breath steadying itself for the room that had forgotten how. Good morning, he said. Not bright, inevitable. If you're hearing me now, you've already heard the clause you didn't read. Sloane's phone dipped as if gravity had changed. Damon's jaw set to neutral. Lucian's thumbs froze over nothing. Benedict didn't raise his voice. He never had to. 6 months ago, we traced our first leak. Competitive bids appeared 1 hour after private board packets went out. 2 weeks later, a foreign fund tried to front-run our oncology announcement with a short. I stepped back because if I stayed in frame, the knives kept coming straight at my chest. I needed to see who was carrying them. He let the sentence breathe. The room tried not to. While I was absent, he said, choosing the word like a scalpel, someone revised an approvals policy so CFO sign-off replaced CEO review on certain vendors. Someone created a friendly shell with a handsome name. He didn't look at Damon, he didn't have to. Someone thought slush is safest when you spell it advisory. Damon's smile didn't move. Kira, near the window, studied the carpet like it might confess. Benedict's mouth eased, just there, as if a private picture had inserted itself. In that same window, a woman in a gray cardigan left a book of poems at a hospice bed because a man didn't have anyone left to read to him. Marta Alvarez put water on a table where Cruelty was thirsty. Theo Carr told a cousin to put the clock back where he found it. I paid attention. He leaned closer, and the camera caught the years people pretended not to see. If you mocked Nora, you forfeited me. If you didn't, you didn't. It's not punitive. It's diagnostic. Lucian laughed a short, ugly bark. Diagnostic, we're not tumors. Act like tissue, Benedict said mildly. Get treated like tissue. Sloane found her angle on indignation. So you fake death, stage a will, and call it ethics. I didn't fake death, he said. I took a different door. He tilted his head. You all insist on the front. Maynard's gaze flicked to Nora and back as if checking a pulse he already knew. Nora stood very still, the cardigan sleeve rolled, hands soft at her sides. The red LED in the cornice pulsed, an old metronome finally getting to keep time. Benedict glanced off-screen, listening to something the room couldn't hear. When he looked back, it felt like he was standing 3 feet away. Some of you will be angry that I made you show yourselves. Anger is cheaper than remorse. His eyes found no one and everyone. You don't get to call this a trap. Kindness was an exit. You walked past it. Damon cleared his throat, polite. If there are allegations, counsel will. There will be more than allegations, Benedict said, not unkind. There will be math. He softened to something only Nora recognized, a man who had memorized the shape of her quiet. And there will be repair. We'll build a foundation that doesn't bleed. We'll put Theo where his heart already stands. We'll fund Marta's scholarship idea for staff families. We'll ask our shareholders to measure us by what we do with the money, not how loudly we hoard it. A door somewhere behind the camera opened and closed with a hush that sounded like permission. Benedict's mouth crooked. One last thing. He reached forward. The picture stuttered, not a glitch, a hand. The frame slid minutely, catching a hint of corridor, the edge of a chair, the fade of shoe leather. He raised his eyebrows like a man about to tell a joke that wasn't one. Look up. The wall went black. For a heartbeat, the room saw itself reflected, open mouths, stiff collars, the napkin's absence where it had been a brand. Then the double doors at the far end shuttered and opened. He walked in with the weather. Not in suit armor, simple jacket, travel creased, the collar wrung from fingers tugging at it on airplanes that didn't announce his name. He was smaller than his portraits and larger than his rumor. The air changed like the minute before rain. Sloane's phone slid in her hand and cracked a thin line across her own face. Lucian stopped moving like a deer remembers it has legs. Damon's expression shifted 1 millimeter. That was his panic. Marta's mouth trembled. She hid it. Theo made a sound that might have been a prayer. Benedict didn't look at any of them first. He crossed the room like a man arriving at home he'd always owed an apology and stopped beside Nora. He didn't touch her yet. He let the nearness work. Hi, he said, and made it sound like a vow. Hi, Nora said, and made it sound like a verdict. He turned to the room, satisfied a vein that had been open 6 months was finally closing. Housekeeping, he said softly. Shall we begin? Benedict didn't climb onto anything to speak. He owned his own height. Let's stop pretending we don't know each other, he said. We do. I've seen who you are when you think the mirror is off. He turned to Sloane first because she wanted him to. You sell humiliation like merch, he said, gentle as a diagnosis. You've taught 1 million strangers to laugh at what they fear. Today it was my wife. Yesterday it was a waitress. Tomorrow it would have been you. If the algorithm ever got bored. Sloane tried on a smile and found the zipper jammed. It's content. It's a habit, he said, and it's over in my house. He faced Lucian. The room felt it before he spoke, like a barometric drop. Debt has a smell. I could smell it on you 2 Christmases ago when you offered to hold the watch I gave you, and again when you laughed too hard at jokes that weren't kind. I don't care that you owe. I care who you make pay. Lucian blinked, jaw working. You think you know my math? I know your victims, Benedict said. They wear aprons and quiet. He didn't look at Marta because he didn't want to make a target out of a lighthouse. Gerald puffed himself up like an old boat finding wind. We're blood. Your habit, Benedict said. Blood is an accident, habit is a choice. He let it cool a beat, then turned to Damon like a surgeon turns to an X-ray. We'll audit. Damon smiled with his eyes first, the way men do when they've rehearsed being unflappable. Of course, transparency is math, Benedict said, not mood. Damon's hands stayed church-steepled. You'll find I've been frugal on the company's behalf. I'll find what I find, Benedict said. And if what I find is a maze, I'll send in people who like mazes. Kira, against the window, didn't move. Her gaze measured the distance between the word audit and whatever future had just opened under Damon's shoes. Benedict let his eyes pass over smaller cruelties, naming without humiliating. Marissa, you don't cheapen people to make pearls look expensive. Trevor, keep your hands off women's bags. Aunt Lillian, piety isn't a sport. Go easy on keeping score. He spoke each sentence like a man labeling drawers so the house could function again. Then he turned to Nora, not as exhibit but as compass. You didn't come for money, he said. You came for the truth of the room. Nora didn't nod, she didn't need to. The cardigan made a small sound as her sleeve settled back to her wrist, the softest gavel. Here's how we move forward, Benedict said to everyone else. There are legal instruments you thought you were owed. Some will still exist, some won't. The difference will not be my mood or your surname, it will be your conduct today on record. Sloane found breath. You can't police tone. I can measure harm, he said. I can also stop paying for it. A hush gathered, the kind that makes people look for exits they didn't notice on the way in. Benedict glanced to Maynard. Read it. Maynard lifted a second folder. Cream stock, blunt corners, no romance. Pursuant to the moral condition and under authority granted by the testator, he said, the following individuals are removed from all ancillary distributions and barred from future discretionary grants or roles within Carr entities. He read the names without relish and without hurry, each one landing like a door closing softly but forever. Lucian Carr. Sloane's intake of breath was a cameraless click. Marissa Carr, Gerald Hayes, Lillian Ward, Trevor Lang, Elise Barton. The list kept going, precise, undeniable, tied to timestamps, posts, words they'd said like they were free. Damon's face didn't flicker, he wasn't on the list. Not today. Maynard paused, paper whispered. And Sloane Carr. Sloane laughed once like a tire hitting a nail. For a joke, for caption, for how you treated a person, Maynard said. He closed the folder. Effective immediately. The room didn't empty, it thinned like a tide pulling back fast enough to show teeth. Security moved the way good security does. Already there, hands quiet, trajectory inevitable. Trevor tried a joke and swallowed it. Lillian's pearls clicked like hail in a bucket. Gerald muttered about lawyers and couldn't find his phone. Sloane stood still as a statue that remembers it's a person. Then her screen lit. Subject, partnership suspension. Another stacked under it. Another, her thumb slid. In light of today's footage, brand safety, values alignment, effective immediately, contractual clause 12B, her face drained to its foundations. This is a pylon, she said to anyone. It's performative, they'll course correct. A fourth email arrived with a subject line that used the word apology like a weapon. She looked up at Nora, as if remembering there was a person at the center of the room she had shaved to an outline. Look, Sloane said, swallowing pride like a dry pill, we can manage this. We can do a selfie together, like a teachable moment. 2 women, 1 room, mistakes were made. It'll hit. We put it in black and white. You say you forgive. Nora's voice was a steady thing a person can tie a boat to. Try apology, not optics. Sloane blinked. I just said apology. You said algorithm, Nora said. They're not the same. Sloane's eyes flicked toward Benedict as if power might be contagious. Benedict didn't move. Maynard didn't move either, except to gesture to the nearest guard. MS, Carr, he said, not unkind. We'll see you to the door. Over a caption, Sloane laughed too brightly. You ban people for posture now. For harm, Maynard said. For records that aren't yours to author. Security stepped in. Sloane lifted her chin to a practiced angle and discovered angles don't stop motion. They guided her gently, professionally. She kept her phone up until the last possible second, even as emails continued to bloom like little white flags. On the threshold, she turned back. For a second, she looked 16, someone's child who had learned attention faster than kindness and never unlearned it. Lucian reached the same liminal place with less ceremony. He shook once, hard, like a man trying to toss off a coat that had fused with his shoulders. Theo caught his sleeve. Lucian, he said, no lecture, just the name. Lucian's mouth softened and then set. You got your belonging, he said. Good for you. He let his arm go limp so the guard didn't have to be cruel. As he passed Marta, he paused, clumsy with apology he didn't know how to conjugate. Go, Marta said gently. Before you say something that breaks you. Marissa went last of the loud ones, mascara fine as ink at the corners, fury cooling to embarrassment. She hissed at a guard. The guard didn't notice. Doors closed with a decorous hush. The room exhaled. It didn't feel righteous. It felt possible, the way open windows feel after a storm tips an old house into honesty. Nora found her breath had slowed to something human. She remembered the courthouse taco truck and Benedict's dumb grin when Salsa hit his cuff. The way he'd laughed like a boy who'd never been allowed to. She had kept a napkin from that day in a drawer with receipts. It smelled faintly of lime. She wondered who she might be if no one ever filmed her again. Now the work, Benedict said softly to her and to everyone left. Now the repairs. Repairs are expensive, Maynard murmured, already building a list in his head: auditors, filings, calls to regulators, calls to donors, a scholarship fund that would take shape if given a spine and a treasurer. Kiera stepped forward without deference. You'll want timestamps and an affidavit, she told Maynard. And a burner, because Damon keeps his phones cleaner than his accounts. Duly noted, Maynard said and meant it. A hush fell that wasn't awkward. Theo rubbed the heel of his hand over one eye like a kid refusing tears the way men are taught to. Marta set a glass of water near Nora's hand and didn't make a ceremony of it. Maynard's phone buzzed. Once. Then again, a different tone. The tone that means something has jumped the fence. He glanced down, and for a man who curated his face the way surgeons curate instruments, the shift was obvious, a micro-flinch like a wire pulled tight somewhere you can't see. What? Benedict asked. Maynard turned the screen so only Benedict and Nora could read. Tabloid alert, secret spouse audio, exclusive leak incoming. The byline rung like a bell Nora knew from kitchens and threaded needles. Jules Parker. Maynard lifted his eyes. Nora's hand found the back of a chair and held, like a person taught to ride out waves without making the boat panic. Somewhere in the ceiling, the red light blinked its metronome blink, and for the first time all day the room felt too recorded. They found a room no one had staged for drama, the mudroom off the North Hall, boots lined like soldiers, detergent promising miracles. Fluorescence hummed. The window held a square of trees. Jules closed the door with her hip and tried for a smile that used to work. Tabloids lie, they use my name to juice the click. Nora watched her the way you watch a stove you're not sure you turned off. They spelled it right. Silence stacked between them, clean and ugly. Jules's fingers worried the seam of her pocket. Nora knew the shape of that fidget from bus stops and double shifts. From the winter Jules had learned which gloves you could take from Lost and Found without getting lectured. Eden said anonymity, Jules whispered. Blurred faces. I was protecting you from their edit. You taped me, Nora said. No rise, just the weight of a fact. In my house, while my husband read his will. Jules's throat clicked. 80, she said, and had to say the rest. 1,000, upfront by Friday. My mother's inhalers aren't covered anymore. The nurse said we can't release until I had $52. I have a cracked molar, the car needs brakes. We wore coats inside that winter, Nora said quietly. Remember, you taped the vent so the heat would stop escaping. We made soup from a rotisserie carcass twice. You asked the landlord for 2 more weeks and he laughed while you talked. I pawned a necklace my aunt gave me. You told me not to, Jules said, eyes wet and angry at being wet. You let me, Nora said. They both stood still, the hum of the light drilling into the second where a choice gets vintage. Jules dragged a hand over her face. They're going to shred you anyway, she said, voice going hoarse. Sloane will spin her pity tour, Gerald will buy a podcast, Damon will leak numbers that read like sins even when they're not. They chew women like you for sport. At least this way I can keep Mom breathing. You could have asked me, Nora said. For money, Jules flinched. You hate being a wallet with legs. You say it turns help into a ledger. I could have said yes, Nora said. Or no, but it would have been ours. Jules took a breath and stepped closer as if proximity could undo arithmetic. I chose survival, she said, sounding like someone pleading the rightness of gravity. Over everything. Over me, Nora said. Jules reached, then dropped her hand. Delete me, she whispered. Hate me if it buys you sleep. I can live with you hating me. I can't live with Mom gasping. Nora's face didn't break. Something behind it did. A hot, mean tide rose, and she held it the way she held everything she didn't want to spill into the room. I don't hate you, she said, and meant it, which hurt worse. I hate the math that told you I was cheaper than Heir. Jules closed her eyes. The silence made a place for a smaller voice. I'll call Eden. I'll try to pull it. Maybe there's a window. Windows go one way when the wire hits, Nora said. The fluorescence flickered, recovered. Nora looked at the little square of trees and found steadiness the way people find a railing in the dark. You chose cash over my life, she said, and she said it without heat, which turned it into law. She opened the door and left before her hands remembered how to shake. Behind her, Jules stared at the washing machine's glass like it might offer a different spin, then fumbled her phone with clumsy fingers and hit call. The line rang once twice, and a newsroom swallowed the rest of the day. They took over the small conference room that still smelled like someone's careful lunch, mustard ghosting the air, polish in the wood. Maynard spread filings the way surgeons lay out instruments, ordered, sharp, in a language that spared no feelings. Theo perched on the edge of a chair, jacket off, sleeves rolled, pen out like he'd finally found a class worth paying attention to. Nora stood, cardigan hung on the chair back, palms flat on the table the way you steady a boat. Start with the 10K footnotes, Maynard said, tapping the stack. You hide sins in the places no one reads, the parts that say see also. Theo found note 14, other current assets. His finger moved as he read. Prepaid consulting, data normalization, strategic calibration. Jesus, these words could park in any neighborhood. Look for the policy revision, Maynard said, the one that replaced CEO review with CFO sign-off. Theo flipped until the paper thinned to onion skin. Here effective as of Q2 per management memo approver, D. Pike. Nora remembered Benedict once telling her that people who rename things aren't always innovators. Sometimes they're just launderers. She followed the text down to the numbers, small print, big shadows. What's Trident Vale LLC billed for in Q3? She asked. Maynard slid a ledger. Aggregation, on paper they bundle micro-vendors to reduce transaction noise. In practice, he lifted a brow. Noise bundled is still noise. Theo found the disbursements page. Wires to Sable Bank, Cayman, Helvetia Private Zug, Northwick Trust. Memos, retainer true-up, non-compete good faith. Advisory, round trip, Nora asked. Maynard nodded. Money leaves to a friendly vendor, returns as something that flatters the P&L, marketing rebates, co-dev credits, sometimes donor advised if they want a halo. You get fake margins and real felonies. Theo's jaw tensed. He did this while Benedict was gone. While Benedict made the mistake of trusting a grown man, Maynard said. A light knock. Kira slipped in sideways like a cat, refusing to admit it cares. She shut the door with her hip and held up her phone as if to a customs agent. On the screen, a clean, damning frame of Orion AP ledger, Trident Vale top left, approver, D. Pike bottom right. She set the phone face down and put another on the table, a cheap burner, then a thumb drive, then a folded sheet of paper that looked like it had learned shame. Banks, dates, fake vendors, Kira said. Plus a card program, 13 plastics issued to contractors who happen to have golf handicaps and the same delivery address. Why? Theo asked. It came out raw. Why help us? Kira considered the window. Because I like sleeping, because he told me I was adjacent like I was furniture, because proximity to danger is only fun until it starts calling you by your middle name. You were his, Theo began and stopped, not wanting to say mistress and make the air dirty. Kira saved him. Alibi with legs, she said. I chose better. Maynard skimmed the printout. Schedule lines up with quarter ends. Classic 4, 57 p.m. Fridays. The round trip completes 2 weeks later as a rebate to a different sub. Kira leaned on the table, nail tapping each tile in memory. Here's the Helvetia transfer on March 28. Here's the Sable one in June. Here's Northwick for the summit that didn't exist. There's a Slack chat where he calls it watering the garden. She glanced at Nora. He thinks metaphors are bulletproof. Nora thought of basil on her apartment sill, the way Benedict had pinched leaves and made the room smell like a plan. She pushed the thought aside before it turned into anger she couldn't use. What do you want, Kira? Immunity, Kira said. And a job, not hush money. A seat in compliance or internal risk. I'm good at watching the door and naming the shoes that walk through it. Immunity's a prosecutor's gift, Maynard said, but we can package your cooperation and sprint it to the right desks. The job is Benedict's call. Kira nodded. Then give this to him. She tapped the thumb drive. And hear me say the quiet part out loud. Damon's not sloppy because he's stupid. He's sloppy because he thinks he's unseen. Theo's pen scratched. We build a package, affidavit, exhibits, chain of custody, your statement. Then the board votes to suspend and we invite the DOJ to lunch. Kira smiled, small and tired. Now you sound like adults. Nora looked at her. Why did you keep the photos? Kira's mouth tilted. Because women like us end up being the last to know we were in a story. I wanted a copy of the chapter where I saved myself. Silence spread and felt like clean linen. Maynard arranged the pages into a stack that made sense to him and would soon make sense to a court. Kira, he said, we'll need dates under oath, full names. Every time he said this is how it's done. He'll try to retrofit ethics, don't let him. Kira slid into a chair, the burner phone between her palms like a prayer book. Ask. And they did. The room filled with names and timestamps, with transfers and memos, with hideouts that suddenly looked like addresses. Theo's fury cooled to function. Maynard's questions carved the path. Kira kept pace, surprising herself by how much she remembered when someone finally wrote it down. Nora listened until the shape of the maze appeared, clear enough to walk without bleeding. When the last detail sat quiet on paper, Nora opened a drawer and took out a pen, cheap, blue. Hospital gift kind. She set a single-page declaration in front of Kira and turned it so the signature line faced the right hand. Nora met her eyes. Sign your statement. Night sat on the estate like a held breath. The lawn lights pooled in tidy circles, leaving the gaps between them the color of a shut eye. Wind combed the beaches. The gravel drive remembered every tire that had ever asked it for mercy. Marta finished loading glassware into the butler's pantry and locked the closet with the little brass key she wore on a coil around her wrist. She checked the back door, latch set, chain on. Old habits, warmer than fear, colder than trust. A shadow separated from the hedge. Evening, a voice said not loud, just threaded with the kind of confidence pain buys. Gray stepped into the spill of light, face cut into planes by years of not being asked twice. He had the look of a man who could find a door in a wall by listening to it think. Marta's fingers curled around her key ring. We're closed, she said. Money's open, he said, and smiled a small, humorless crescent. Basement in 20, wasn't it? Your boy decided to get poetic. He glanced at the lock like someone reading a menu. Keys. Lucian stumbled into the frame of light as if the earth had tilted. Sweat made a dark V down his shirt. Don't, he reached quick and clumsy for Marta's wrist. She yanked back, but he was younger, wired on panic. The coil snapped. Keys clattered once, twice, a cheap bell in the quiet. Lucian, Marta said low. Don't make me remember you like this. He froze, then lied with his mouth while his hands scooped. I'll put them back. Gray knelt and lifted the keys with the care of a man handling evidence. He turned one, watching the way the light caught engraving. Basement, he guessed, and smiled again, this time like a test result. Doors pretend they're more complicated than they are. Nora's voice arrived before she did. Put the keys down. She stepped into view with the cardigan pulled tight and her hair looped like she'd made a plan and then cut it in half. The patio camera over her shoulder blinked red, steady as a metronome in an anxious heart. Gray's eyes ran over her and filed the data. You're the problem they keep talking about. I'm the witness you can't buy, Nora said. You want Lucian. You touch her and I bury you in discovery, extortion, trespass, interstate threats. This house is a thesis in cameras. Every footstep you take is a line item with a timestamp. He laughed softly. Lawyer words, you think they scare teeth. They scare the people who hire teeth, she said. Those people don't pay for trouble that files itself. Wind found the chimes, they flicked a cold little melody. Gray weighed the keys in his hand. You know what debt men hate, he asked. Women deciding what happens next. You're not here for philosophy, Nora said. Put them down. Lucian swallowed. Gray don't just, I'll figure something. You figured nothing, Gray said, not bothering to turn. You typed, I drove. Something shifted in the dark behind Gray, a change in temperature as much as sound. Benedict stepped out from the shadow line with two men flanking him, ex-military by the way they breathed, shirts that didn't mind moving, hands empty but not unprepared. Benedict didn't raise his voice. Option 1, he said, you leave with your gums intact. Option 2, you star in a training video about felony dumb. Gray angled his head, eyes flicking to the security team the way cats consider dogs, evaluating boredom, not brawn. His right hand dipped, the kind of dip that ends in a tool. The taller guard said, calm as a lullaby, hands. Gray slowed. The pause was thin as paper, then he set the keys on the table like a man putting change down to pay for a cheap miracle. He showed palms. Smart, Benedict said. Gray's mouth quirked. Not my first porch. He looked past Benedict, through Nora. To Lucian, you owe men who don't knock, he said. They don't like stories about cameras. They won't get one, Benedict said. They'll get counsel. You'll make it worse, Gray said, conversational to Lucian. Rich people always do when they think they've found a sheriff. Nora stepped in front of Marta without theatrics. You picked the wrong door, she said. Gray's gaze ticked to the patio cam's red light, and for the first time he looked mildly annoyed. Gate code was cute, he said. Whoever texted it likes the letter D a lot. He smiled like someone tossing a match he didn't plan to watch burn. Ask your house who's fond of revising policies. Damon's initial hung in the air like a low note no one wanted to claim. Enough, Benedict said, and the guards moved. Wrist, elbow, leverage. A polite physics that ended with Gray facing the hedges, hands secured in plastic cuffs that made a small, stubborn sound when they met. Lucian sagged. The keys lay on the table like a confession no one signed. He looked at Marta, at her empty wrist, at the coil on the stone like a shed snake. I'm sorry, he said, and it wasn't slick. It wasn't anything but a boy recognizing the woman who had ironed shirts he'd pretended ironed themselves. I'm sorry, Aunt Marta. Marta lifted her chin a fraction. Bring them back, she said, and bring yourself. Security walked Gray toward the service drive where the cameras watched and the law, finally invited, would have angles to choose from. The wind shifted. Somewhere a door settled in its frame with a small, decisive click that sounded like a house learning its own teeth. The boardroom faced east, all window and winter light. Dawn collected in the glass carafes like something you could pour. The table smelled like lemon oil and the last argument. People who had been loud yesterday were very careful with their chairs. Damon Pike sat at the far end, legal pad squared, pen uncapped, face composed to its factory settings. "We can all agree," he began, "that yesterday's spectacle created market risk. We need discipline, narrative, a protective order barring leaks while we, as fiduciaries, evaluate." "Leaks," Benedict said not loud. "We're in a drought, that what you call it." Counsel dialed in from a speaker in the center of the table. The voice had the calm of someone who invoices by the minute. "We should proceed with facts and minimize adjectives." "Good," Maynard said. "Then let's count." Nora didn't sit. She placed a thin folder on the table and opened it as if laying down a map. The cardigan sleeve slid to her wrist. "Affidavit from Kira Moss," she said, former consultant to Damon Pike. "Exhibits include Orion screenshots, invoice patterns, the policy memo replacing CEO review with CFO sign-off, and a wire schedule that likes Fridays at 4:57 p.m. A director whose cufflinks had outlived 3 recessions shifted. Is MS. Moss reliable? Ra at the perimeter didn't flinch. "I kept receipts because he taught me to." Damon's smile almost reached his eyes. "We're really giving a disappointed companion a microphone." "Witness," Nora said. "Names matter." She handed out copies. Columns ran like train tracks. Trident Vale, Approver D. Pike, Helvetia, Sable, Northwick. Notes scrolled down the margins in Kira's neat hand. Watering the garden, card program to 13, memo good faith. Counsel's voice returned. "These are not conclusions, they are flags. To discharge duty the board must vote the audit," Theo said, surprising himself. "Independent, forensic. Suspend until complete." Damon rolled the pen between finger and thumb, a tiny planet with one indifferent sun. "You suspend your CFO in a media hurricane and you invite a short attack. We will bleed 30% of cap in a week on optics alone." "Math," Benedict said. "Not mood. How much did we bleed already into a hole that calls itself an advisory?" Damon looked down the table as if seeking a safer room. "Trident Vale aggregated low-value vendors to reduce noise. If you want to criminalize modernization, at least learn the vocabulary." Kira stepped forward just enough to be seen. He modernized approval to one signature, his, and called it efficiency. Nora slid a single page free. The policy revision memo. At the bottom, D. Pike, a loop too tidy for an accident. She didn't point, she let the room's eyes find it. A director cleared her throat soft, but with a future in it. "Suspend, commission and independent. Engage DOJ prosecutions as necessary. We owe the truth more than we owe the quarter." Another director, then another. Maynard counted hands, measured silence. "Mr. Pike," he said, "pending audit, you are suspended with pay. Access is restricted. Devices surrender now. Any retention destruction behavior will be interpreted as a confession with extracurriculars." Damon placed his phone on the table like a man setting down a blade he still loved. He stood. "Congratulations," he said, gentle as arsenic. "You've let Nitwer run your balance sheet." Benedict didn't smile. "She runs the part that counts." Damon looked past Nora to Kira. His mouth made something tender and wrong. "I made you," he said, conversational as coffee. "You were furniture before me." Kira's shoulders loosened the way doors loosen when weather breaks. "And I unmade you," she said, "with a picture frame." He glanced toward the glass, toward his own reflection in the city waking up. "You think this ends with a memo?" he asked the window. "Boards love purity until the stock chart calls them a liar." "Ends," Nora said. "We're just starting the clean." In the corridor, where the carpet drank footsteps and the walls loved secrets, Damon leaned close enough that Kira could count the pores he'd invested in. His breath was mint and threat. "You're not safe," he whispered. "You never were. Men who water gardens plant things you don't see until they grow teeth." Kira didn't step back. "Good," she said softly. I stopped blinking. They met in the small study at the back of the house, the one with the window that caught afternoon like a hand. No chandelier, no audience. The red LED in the corner blinked its patient blink, a witness that had stopped feeling like a spy. Benedict stood with a folder he hadn't opened in years. Theo took the chair by the radiator and balanced on its edge like he didn't trust furniture not to give out. Nora stayed standing, cardigan on the chair back, palms on the table, the position she took when something needed building, not burning. "I should have adopted you," Benedict said, no throat clearing, just the brick. "Years ago." Theo didn't move, his mouth tried for a laugh and found nothing. "Mom said you didn't because I wasn't brand safe." "Your mother threatened to obliterate any chance I had of peace," Benedict said, choosing the word carefully. She said she'd drag you through court like bait if I filed. I let fear run the calendar. That's on me. Theo stared at the window until the trees blurred. You picked quiet over me. I picked a bad horizon, Benedict said, and I'm sorry for every version of you that learned to be polite about it. Silence filled in around the apology and set. Nora slid a glass of water toward Theo. He didn't drink. He set his fingers on either side of it like a person warming their hands at a small fire. We can't rewrite clocks, Nora said. We can lay out a new map. She slid a packet across the table, the Carr Foundation for Work and Dignity at the top in plain type. Endow it with what isn't needed to run the science. Publish the ledger monthly. No halo, just math. Benedict nodded. Line items. MARTA College Fund, Nora said. Scholarships for staff families, anyone who changed sheets, cooked meals, cut grass, raised children who thought they were raising themselves. Theo chairs the board if he wants it. Stipends for relatives who didn't harass me today, small, transparent, revocable. Help is a verb, not a trust fund adjective. Theo's eyes found hers. You want me to chair? I want you to belong by doing, Nora said. Not by last name. Maynard appeared in the doorway like punctuation and set a small stack down. Bylaws, a conflict of interest policy that read like a prayer, a simple pledge. No salary over a cap you'd be embarrassed to say out loud, he said. No company cars, full disclosures. Publish receipts the way people publish weddings. Theo read, lips moving, a leftover habit from nights he'd taught himself algebra in a hallway while adults debated decency in the kitchen. This doesn't make me rich, he said. It makes you responsible, Benedict said. Rich is the least interesting part of any sentence. Theo picked up the pen and hovered. If I sign this, I stop being your stepson. You stop being a guest, Benedict said. You've never been a step anything to me. I just let paperwork make a liar out of my mouth. Theo looked at Nora. Her face was the kind of steady you could set a book on. Do you, he started, then shook his head and signed. Theo Carr, chair-elect. He signed the pledge next. Salary cap, no perks, disclosure monthly. His name on paper looked like a door he'd finally walked through. Benedict reached into the old folder and in a small, quiet twist put down a ghost. Adult adoption petition, unfiled, dated 3 years back, signatures half complete. For when you're ready, he said, if you ever want the law to match the life. Theo touched the paper like it might bite. I don't need a new last name, he said, voice breaking and then setting. I need a job. You've got one, Benedict said. The moment almost held. Then Maynard's phone pulsed as if the room had a pulse. He read, and for the first time in a decade, the lawyer forgot to keep his face. He turned the screen so they could see the headline bloom. Daily Sphere, exclusive. Secret spouse audio from Carr estate, protected, test, cut them off. Below it, a byline that made Nora's fingers go cold, Jules Parker. The study's red LED blinked once, steady, like a tiny heart refusing to panic. Yet, morning washed the estate like a sink full of clean water. The gravel steamed. Bees moved the way they always had, indifferent to headlines. Nora walked the path to the herb garden, cardigan over a thin t-shirt, hair looped up with a pencil. Basil breathed green at her wrist. The Daily Sphere piece had hit at dawn, cropped audio, italicized outrage. Protected, test, cut them off. The clip made her sound like a guillotine in knitwear. Comments did what comments do when you feed them blood. Maynard spent 20 minutes building a thread that didn't posture. He posted the full recording, the will clause, the timestamps. He didn't call anyone names. He put receipts in order like plates in a cupboard, and let them rest where hands could find them. Record, not rumor, he typed, and didn't add a single exclamation point. Jules called. Nora let the first ring die, then answered the second. I tried to pull it, Jules said, voice low, sanded. Wire hit last night. Eden says public interest. I sent you the contract, the emails. If you sue, I'm a witness. If you don't, I am anyway. Nora pinched a basil tip and made the morning smell like a kitchen. Bring me the receipt that keeps your mother breathing, she said, then we'll talk about what you broke and how to fix some of it. I don't deserve. You're right, Nora said. Deserve is a bad verb. She almost said, I love you anyway, she didn't. Love, like money, works best when it's not an alibi. She hung up and found Benedict in the garden, sleeves rolled, dirt in the lines of his fingers like an apology he was willing to own. He handed her a mug. Truce offering, he said. War's over, Nora said. Now we rebuild the house. They walked the rows. He told her he'd slept 2 hours and dreamed nothing for the first time in months. She told him she'd yelled into a pillow in the mudroom until the light flickered and didn't feel guilty about the electricity. Statement at noon, Maynard said from the path as if reading a script the day had written. He lifted a folder. We restructure publicly. Carr Foundation for Work and Dignity launches with endowment details, stipend rules. Transparent ledger. Theo chairs, MARTA sits finance with an outside accountant who isn't faint of heart. Will name acts of repair, not apologies. Put Kira in compliance, Nora said, if she wants it. She already said yes, Maynard said. Damon's counsel sent a letter that thinks adjectives can stop math. DOJ's on at 3. Good, Benedict said softly. Let them bring rulers. A robin landed on the fence like punctuation. Marta came through the gate with a basket of laundry, held up a sleeve. Your cardigan's button, she said. It's been hanging on by luck. She threaded a needle where no one would have noticed and made the loop neat. Nora watched the small repair with a gratitude that embarrassed her. Do you ever get tired of stitching other people's mess? Marta smiled without looking up. I like hands busy when the mouth wants to say something it can't take back. At noon, they stood in front of a podium that belonged to no brand. No logo wall, no step and repeat. Just a black mic and a row of chairs that squeaked like every chair. Benedict spoke 8 sentences. Maynard read 4 paragraphs. Theo read 2 lines his hands had written the night before. Then Nora took the mic. Wealth reveals character, she said. But character is not a mood, it's a practice. Here is what we will do, not later, now. She listed them: audits with names, scholarships with caps, stipends with end dates, a rule that apologies cost hours at places without chandeliers. She didn't say forgiveness, she said work. A reporter tried to poke the bruise. So no mercy. Mercy is not press release shaped, Nora said. People who want it can come build with us and earn it in sawdust. They ended without music. Back in the kitchen, they ate standing up: toast, apples, a plate of cheese no one photographed. The house felt less like a museum and more like a place where shoes got kicked off under chairs that didn't mind. Jules arrived near 3, hair pulled plain, eyes swollen sober. She handed Maynard a folder and her phone, a full chain of emails, a wire receipt, the voice pin she'd pried out of the bookend, a hit-piece rough draft with her edits in the margins where she'd tried to dull the knives. I can't fix what I did, she said, looking at Nora and then down. I can help carry what's left. Then carry, Nora said. Start in the call center when the foundation launches. People will yell, you won't hang up. Jules nodded like punishment, and Grace had the same bone structure. As afternoon slid toward evening, the estate remembered how to breathe. Security walked their loops without needing to become weather. Theo took a call in the study and said the word chair without flinching. Kira sat at a laptop like a person who had decided to be a lock instead of a window. Marta hung the cardigan on a peg by the back door. The red LED above it blinked, steady, patient. Then a touch from Maynard's phone went dark. Cameras powered down one by one, a house closing its eyes. Nora leaned against the doorjamb and let the quiet put its hands on her shoulders. Benedict came to stand beside her, arm not quite around, their bodies remembering they had time. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, she echoed. We try to be better. A chime sounded from the front hall, short, official, not the doorbell. Maynard's head turned. Registered courier, he said, already moving. He came back with a heavy envelope, official green stripe, black letters that didn't blink. He set it on the counter. United States Department of Justice, request for records voluntary. Benedict exhaled. They're early. Nora looked at the envelope, then at the cardigan on its peg, the button holding, the thread clean and small. She slid a finger under the flap and felt the weight of paper and the future that comes with it. Good, she said, and the house, for once, agreed.